Okay, we're going to start off by unwrapping some of this model, and we're going to try to use some of the projection techniques that are available here. And we're going to start doing some unwrapping techniques, and after that, after I've unwrapped a few of these, then I'm going to leave the remaining parts for you to unwrap to complete the process. So we'll begin with unwrapping the well itself. As you can see, it's fairly complicated geometry that's been exported out of ZBrush. It's not as easy to select. When you start off the model, you'll have no UVs applied to this, so we're going to be using a mixture of automatic mapping that we were looking at earlier on. So if you open your UV menu here and just have that open like I have, we're going to be working in the UV editor, so I'll just load that up. So we're going to be, if you look at the UVs, there's nothing applied just yet, and I'm going to hide that this off, so we can turn this the grid off so we can see there's nothing there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a cylindrical projection to this. We used automatic mapping in the last video, which kind of gave us a view of what we were doing, a starting off point. But because this is a cylindrical shape, it's good to kind of get just see what happens when I applied that. So you can see that this is kind of giving me this shape here. So if I complete this all the way around, you'll see that it kind of brings everything into the box there. So if I kind of squash that, that kind of squeezes everything into that UV space, into this 0 to 1 space. I don't want to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave that just because it's a starting point and I can see what I'm doing here. So it's still very rough, very complicated. For this model, for instance, here's a well. I can apply a tileable texture, so I'm not going to be unwrapping this to be part of a shell or an island. This is something that you can apply a tileable texture to, and I'm going to apply a tileable texture to this, and then apply a tileable texture to probably this rope as well. Another thing that's very complicated to unwrap. The rest of the object, I want you to kind of create a tile sheet where you unwrap, just like the last video where we unwrapped a box and created different faces. You'll be able to do that. But for this one, we're going to use a tileable texture. So it's a fairly complicated shape. So what I'm going to do is, just so I can isolate what I'm seeing here, instead of this everything being visible, I can use a shortcut here and go show, hit isolated, view select, isolate select, and view selected. This way I've hidden everything else so I can see the model properly, so I can just navigate through that. It gets a bit clustered with all these menus, so we want to make sure that we can do that. Now, looking at this model, what we'll do is we'll find a tileable texture. Just I've gone to Google here and I've looked for some stone wall textures. Try to look for one that's tileable, and let's see what happens when we bring one in. And I went through here and I found this one, and I already loaded it up into Photoshop just to make things a bit more faster. So here's my image, and of course this image is the size of it is just completely different, so you can't just use any old texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a 2048 by 2048 texture size. So just create a new texture, and I'm going to move this across from this. I can load up the texture into Maya just the way it is, but that's not a good practice because it becomes problematic once we start. So I'm just going to squash this. It becomes problematic if you just start loading up textures just like that in Maya, because if you have various different resolutions, stick to the power of 2, so 1024, 2048, 4K textures, 512. Just stick to the power of 2, and especially when it comes to rendering and even real-time rendering. It's faster for the computer to find the textures, and it just makes everything more efficient. So you can have a large texture, that's not a problem, but just keep it efficient by using power of 2. Now, one of the things that we want to check if this texture is tileable. I found this. So one way to check this is if you go to filter, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit other, and you'll see the offset button here. Now I'm just gonna type in 250. Oh, sorry, let me just undo that. Just do that again, other, hit offset, and if you hit 250, I can't see a seam in the horizontal view, so that means that it is tileable. So it's tiling that way. So that's 250. I'm going to put that to 0, so just take that back, and let's try the same thing again in the vertical. 250. Now you can see that there is a seam here. Now this when you create a tileable texture, you want to avoid kind of having seams in that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use probably something like so I'm just gonna first of all hit 800 here, so I can just bring the seam bit down. There's a bit of a problem here with this big seam running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the clone brush tool, clone stamp brush tool, and I'm going to select an area that works, for instance this bit here, and I'm going to kind of just run this across the seam. It's not perfect when you do this, take your time, and then you maybe use some parts of the other texture and blend that in until that seam is gone. So this was tileable in the horizontal, but it wasn't when we did it vertically. Now it is. I mean, I've just done this quite roughly, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my offset and put this back the way it is. It was, so it was up, I had done plus 800, now I'm going to do minus 800, so the texture looks like it looked before. Just that our seam is gone. It's a bit repeating there, but that's something that you can take a bit more time, maybe use another point of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that as a JPEG. Just save it somewhere where you can see that, and I'm just going to call this well diffuse diff. So I'm just going to save that as a JPEG, give it a few seconds, let it save, and then I'm going to go into Maya and I'm going to load this texture up. Now I'm going to give this model a new material. So if I click on rendering and hit Lambert, should know how to do this by now, and I'm just going to call this well, don't mind that, and if I just navigate back to that well there and go into the color channel and load up my texture, just make sure that's saved that out. Okay, I'll have to press OK on this side, so make sure that's saved on this side. Go back into Maya, now you'll see that there it is, and I'm going to load that up. And if your texture doesn't load up right away, make sure you hit number 6 on the keyboard, and that should load up your texture. And next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to fix some of the stretching that's taking place in this area, because we don't want to have this. This is really bad, and this is quite bad as well, so we want to make sure that we get the stretching aspect of it right. So in the next video we're going to do that.